everyone, Great Power 60 here. Welcome to another Tea with Me Tuesday. This is my cup for today. You saw that in the beginning. Okay, let's take a look at what my cup is. It's Royal Albert and it's called the Regal Series. So that is what it is. And it is pink with a gold trim. I really like it. So I made a pot of tea tonight because I would like to talk about something that I've run into a few times, and it's all about being alone and how women handle it, how I handle it, my attitude. I was watching Carolyn's RV Life, and she was talking about she's a solo woman. She's single, and she lives in an RV, and it's kind of all the rage right now, especially in the United States, where people are giving up their sticks and bricks houses and they are moving into motorhomes to travel, to find an easier life, to fulfill their life, to do whatever it is that they feel they need to do to make their lives feel meaningful and worthwhile, I guess. Now, that's kind of in a nutshell. So let me go back and give you an idea of what my background is. I had a mom and dad. I had a grandmother and a grandfather. My grandfather passed away. My grandmother and my grandfather lived with us. Oh gosh, I don't know. A couple of years, I think. He passed away. He passed away in January, and I turned 7 in April, so I was 6. And my grandmother always lived with us. Was my father's mother. She was always a strong woman, even though, the role, the 50s imagination, the 40s and the 50s of a woman, staying home and looking after the home while the husband goes to work. I never saw it as a negative thing. I always saw it as a positive thing. I saw my grandmother as a strong woman who could cook and clean, and even at her age, and to me as a young child, a grandmother is an old lady. How an old woman can wash the floor, she could fish, she could, I don't think she could drive a car. I never even thought of that till just this second. But she was a strong woman. She was physically strong, even though she was very petite and very chubby. But she was quite capable of taking care of herself and her family. I also had a mother who worked. Mom used to work from 6 till 2. She was a supervisor, food services. She looked after, my dad was military, she looked after the mess hall, making sure that lunches were made for all of the, they used to make lunch boxes and give them to the troops, to give them to the guys. And they come there for their lunch and for their breakfast and so on. And Mom knew so many people. My mom was a very social woman. She was very well loved. She worked hard, and I saw her as a strong woman. I had aunts, and I had a lot of aunts who also were strong women. At least to a child, they seemed strong. They handled themselves, they looked after their homes, their families, They went out and worked. They worked in the workforce in various places, offices, and on and on and on. So I had a lot of this kind of background where I viewed women, and I think was attracted to women, attracted to as in curious about women who were strong women. And I also had an imagination. I had a wonderfully vivid imagination. And I wanted to be a nun. I loved spirituality. I loved praying. I loved the silence. I loved the quiet of meditation and prayer. This is as a child. This is as an 8 and 9-year-old. Now, that's not to say I didn't party with my friends, party at an 8-year-old party, but you know what I'm saying. I had girlfriends. We had singing groups. We played games. We chatted. We did things. We went shopping. We did blah, blah, blah. You know, all the typical things that young girls in the 50s and 60s did. And one of the things that I remember very vividly about myself was as I became around 10 or 11, I used to love to pretend. I loved to pretend. Should have been an actress maybe, I don't know. But I love to pretend, and I love to imagine things. So I imagined that women put certain things in their purses. So I would put things like young girls do, maybe not today, but in my day, handkerchiefs and a wallet and lipstick and perfume and a pen and a notebook and makeup of some kind, and almost to the point where it was too heavy to carry. And off I would go from my house to catch the city bus, and 15-minute ride on the bus would take me to right downtown. And I loved to go to museums, art galleries. I loved to go shopping alone and pretend that I was this sophisticated teenager who was independent and strong and all of those things. I loved going to museums and art galleries and just look at the creations that I envied people who were creative, who had such a talent. And I would spend hours. And in the 50s and 60s, we had an art gallery, and at the very top floor, there was like a little cafeteria. And I would go up to the cafeteria, and there I would order a cup of tea. I didn't drink tea in those days, but when I went out, I drank tea. And I would have a cup of tea. I would have my notebook. I would have my purse. I would look out, because it was the top floor. It was a tall building, but it wasn't the tallest. But a beautiful view of our city. And I would sit there and imagine myself a sophisticated young woman. And that's kind of my one side of my personality. As I got a little bit older, even though I had a lot of friends, boys that liked me, I liked boys, but I had a heart calling to become a nun. I had a feeling that was my vocation, that I was going to have just the kind of life that I imagine a nun, once she's said her vows and everything else, would teach little kids, would go and help in a hospital, go and be of service. So I went on a retreat, and there was maybe 12 girls from our area, and then we went to a retreat in London, Ontario, Mount St. Joseph, it was called, and we went to a convent where the convent had sectioned off where there were nuns and there were novices, and then girls like us who wanted to be nuns. And we had to be silent. It was a weekend. We had to be silent from Friday after supper to Sunday at supper. No talking at all. And I found it absolutely liberating. We had chores to do. We had prayers. We had prayer books to read. We could walk the grounds and sit and read and think about our faith and think about God and think about whatever. I found it absolutely heavenly. I loved the silence. I loved the inner peace that you could feel. I loved the spirituality of silence. It's hard to explain. So, for a year, I wanted to be this nun. After this experience, I was totally devoted, read everything I could, went and talked to my priest a couple of times. Also, as a young girl at our church, we had the priest's residence was attached to the church, and in his living room, he sort of had a big kind of boardroom area where we would babysit. So I would go to first mass at 7 o'clock and then babysit the next two mass, which usually was 10 and 12, and look after the kids, and loved it. And that's what I did every Sunday. So I talked to the priest one day, and he was, encouraging and so on and so forth, until it got more serious when I started thinking, how is it going to happen? How, Now, in my mind, I thought I was going to become a nun, visit my family, go off on adventures, come back and see them, do my service, blah, blah, blah. That's what I thought. But apparently in those days, now I guess it's all different now, but in those days, once I went into the convent, I could no longer have any contact with my family. I had to give up my family to become a bride of God, of Jesus. I couldn't do it. I struggled for months with that. And I used to, as a young girl, stare at my parents, stare at my little brother, stare at my grandmother, thinking to myself, how can I leave them? How can I never not see them again? So I made the decision not to do it, because I don't think my heart could handle not having any contact. Now, as I said, that was in those days. Things have changed, I'm sure. But so I gave it up. So that was one part of my youth growing up, where wanting to be a nun came to an end. And I think it was around 10 or 11. I may be wrong. I think it was around 10 or 11. So I still craved the independence of doing things alone. I still loved doing things alone. So I used to, as I was saying earlier, pack up my purse with all the things I thought women put in their purses. I took the city bus, went downtown, and I would go to restaurants alone. I was 10, 12, 14. Um, I would go to museums and just be in awe, as I said. Art, excuse me. I loved to look at all the different paintings and all the different sculptures, and I loved to just imagine. And this is what I used to do. I would imagine what it was like to be a painter painting that in his studio or her studio. I was just in awe of all of those things. So growing up, I have always done things alone. And as I got older, and it was kind of expected because of the background, it was expected that I would find a husband and have children, and that would be my life. And I wanted to be part of that, and then got sucked into the old 60s love thing. Never took drugs, never did, never had the inclination. I never liked not being in control. That's why I never drank and get drunk, because I need to be able to know what's going on around me. It's just the kind of person I was. So having all of these strong women around me, and having, I guess, being shy, because I was a little shy growing up, shy to adults, not shy to my peers. I mean, I was a little shy to my peers, but mostly shy to adults, because we were told that children were seen and not heard. We did not talk back. We did not yell. We were not allowed to yell in our house. So when mom and dad were gone out, my brother and I screamed at each other all the time. He would tease me, I would scream, blah, blah, blah. And even dating, I dated, I got engaged, I got married, I had my children, and I got divorced. And all of the time, I always felt strong. I need a tea break. Where was I? So, after I mean, even when I was married and my husband was off on maneuvers and we lived in Germany for 3 years, I had to be independent. I had to do things alone. And I learned to drive a car, and I started to work. I worked for the Canadian military in an office, and I got to know people. And I was always the strong, even though I wasn't. I was always the strong one that people would come to. When the guys were gone on exercise for 3, 4, 5 weeks at a time, I would drive to different friends that I knew that maybe they might need something. Now, we didn't have telephones, so I couldn't call ahead. But after work or on weekends, I would drive over. Some of them were quite far away and some of them were quite close, and just stop by and just, we'd have a cup of tea and we'd talk, or, drink or whatever, and see if they needed anything. And on my next visit, bring them anything that they needed, or if they needed to go for a ride or needed to drive somewhere. And I loved that, because without telephones, you didn't have people bothering you. So being alone, I was quite content being alone. My house was clean. My, laundry was done. But, I loved that. I loved the service, I guess, is what I'm saying. I loved doing things for people. And after the divorce, I still did things on my own. I was a single mom. I raised 2 kids. I dated. Eventually I did date someone seriously after a couple of years, but maintained my independence, maintained my strength. Um, I think when I was doing some psychology stuff, that's another topic, I discovered about myself that I had a fear of failure. I had a fear of other people seeing me fail. And that's what motivated me, I think, to do things on my own. I think that part of the fear of someone seeing me fail was more humiliating than failing. Because to me, you fail, you try again. You fail, you try again. But if somebody um, depends on you and is with you, and you do something and you fail at it, the heavy burden of disappointing people was very heavy on me. So I think that motivated me to just do things on my own, and I loved it. And I often wonder how many women um, can honestly say they enjoy being alone. They enjoy doing things alone. They enjoy the quiet. I think as we are growing, and I think it's sad for women today, young women, because they're programmed to do things with other girlfriends, to have lots of friends, to have that social connection. Um, I had social connections, but I didn't have intimate friends. I didn't have a lot of very close friends. Usually, I'd have one or two or three, um, independent of each other, and but I never had group friends because I guess in my heart I didn't want to be dependent on, because I always felt that I was a wife, I was a mother. Um, I had to work when I didn't want to because I wanted to be with my children, so I was obliged to my boss, to my coworkers. I always felt all of these people, these pressures, so that when I had time alone, I treasured my time alone. I treasured it. And I often wonder how many other people feel the same way. I treasured my alone time. I treasured my independence. I treasured the fact that I could be happy having a cup of tea, talking with friends, or I could be happy sitting down, meditating, reading a book, saying prayers, going for a walk. Um, Doing things alone strengthens your spiritual self, I think. It strengthens you as a woman, as a person, because even if you're a man, the pressures of a man to be independent, um, it's very difficult, but easier, because men marry women, men marry men. I mean, they're partners. They have jobs and so on. For a man to feel the way I felt, which is total bliss to be alone, total bliss. How many men actually can do that? I often wonder, if they're missing out, because the demands on them to be the perfect father, to be the breadwinner, to be the perfect, colleague, perfect employee, and all of these things. When does he have a chance? Now, I know men like to do physical things, so sports and things are into them. But if you're not a sports-minded guy, where do you get your solace? Where do you get your quiet time? And I think that's one of the advantages of being a woman, is that we are expected to have that quiet time. We're expected to outlive our husbands and live alone. And I never, ever resented living alone, ever. Whereas when I'm at home, I'm myself, I'm alone, I can do things. I can imagine, find my spiritual self. I can find my silly, humorous self and enjoy being alone. So I often wonder how many people actually get that. And I think the girls today, and I know my daughter is one of them, she never liked doing anything alone. I remember that so well growing up. I don't know how she is now because she's had to do a lot, but she's got a husband, she's got 3 kids, and she's got a lot of friends, and they do, you know, she's involved in a lot of things, and the nursing, in the sports, and so on. Very much like her father, very much into activities and that kind of thing, whereas I was more of the at-home kind of person. But the girls today fear being alone or doing things alone. They have that pressure on themselves instead of embracing it, instead of of blossoming and opening up to the possibilities of being self-sufficient and being independent and being able to do things when you want, for what you want, is a gift. It's a gift. And they don't see it as a gift. They see it as a burden. They see it as being shunned and shameful and all of those things. And I really think that's too bad, because in my heart and in my mind and in my little world, independence, solitude, and being able to do things when you want and go where you want alone without having the burden, which I felt it was a burden, of having someone come with me all the time. Now, I could do it once in a while, and I did. I would go with friends once in a while, and that was fine, but not all the time. And yet, I love my social life. I loved doing volunteer work. I loved being with people. I loved service. I loved all of those things. So, you know, I feel bad for the girls today. And I wonder how you feel about it. Do you feel the need to have someone in your life? Do you feel the need to be with someone? My mother is a good example. She was a strong woman, but she's always been with someone. She's always lived with someone. She's always taken care of someone. That is the way she was brought up. Her job was to take care of someone and to have a partner in her life. And I'm total opposite of Mom. And I find that interesting. So that's why it was difficult for me when Mom first moved in, was to get used to talking again, getting used to, because I was used to living alone, used to doing things my way, and poor Mom was used to chatting and socializing and doing things for or doing things with, you know. So there comes full circle for me, where I now need to do things with Mom, for Mom, and it's not bad at all, you know. It took a while to get used to. It reminds me of something someone once said to me, that the first year of marriage is horrible. The first year of living with somebody is horrible. But if you can get through that first year, you can make it. The first year of getting used to each other, compromising, getting all of those, you know, little quirks out of the way. I'm going off on a tangent, aren't I? And this is much too long. I want to thank you for joining me, and we'll see you again soon. Bye for now.